Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Reelika Runnel, and I'm working as an advisor to the Secretary General in the Estonian Ministry of Environment. And in addition, I'm also a coordinator for our National Nuclear Energy Working Group. And in my today's presentation, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the activities of our Nuclear Energy Working Group. Estonia has been so far quite neutral towards nuclear energy. Since we are located in a close range of nuclear power plants in our neighboring countries, we are actually, we have had to acknowledge the fact that the nuclear power plants are very close to our borders. And at the same time, we are actually using nuclear energy ourselves, coming from Finland. But so far, Estonia has not constructed any nuclear power plants, and until today, we have not yet decided whether to construct and to build a nuclear power plant into Estonia or not. But just like Mr. Timo Tatar mentioned earlier, we are not ruling out any viable solutions that help us to achieve our climate targets beyond 2030 and to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. So if it turns out that nuclear energy is the best solution from the socio-economic point of view, we are ready to consider it. But during our considerations, there are several critical questions we will have to provide answers from the government side. First of all, we have to face the fact that at the moment, Estonia lacks the competences, regulatory framework, and experiences with nuclear energy. Our competences are sufficient to cover radiation protection and nuclear safety at a very general level. But if we plan to construct a nuclear power plant, those competences need to be developed. Then, as a second thing, this public perception of nuclear energy, whether our people are ready to accept nuclear power as one viable option in Estonia. And as Mr. Liive just pointed out, according to their survey, 68% of Estonians are in general in favor of nuclear energy. From the government side, we conducted the survey as well in February, just before the Ukrainian the aggression started in Ukraine. And according to our survey, the result was also quite high. It was 59%. But at the same time, we asked members of the public what are their greatest fears or what kind of problematic issues they see that relates to nuclear energy. And 68% answered that they see as the biggest problem with nuclear energy, they see the spent fuel management and radioactive waste management in general. So this is one of the focus areas we will have to deal with from the government's perspective, especially from the communication side. And then we will have to figure out whether there is an area in Estonia, a location, a local municipality that is willing to accept a nuclear power plant on their territory. From our nuclear energy working group's side, we have established a sub-working group on spatial planning matters. And we are starting a preliminary site selection procedure, and the first results should be available towards the end of the first quarter of 2023. So, but yes, the public acceptance questions remains whether the inhabitants of this municipality are willing to accept the fact that they might have a nuclear power plant in their backyard. Then there's an important question with the technology selection as well. So we have to acknowledge the fact that those small modular reactors that are potentially suitable for Estonia are not commercially available yet, if we exclude developments in Russia and China. But in the Western countries, we will have to first see this first-of-a-kind module. And as Mr. Liiva mentioned, that given the circumstances that Estonia is a country without prior nuclear experience, we cannot be a testing ground for new technologies. So we cannot build a first-of-a-kind into Estonia. So we have to see one working somewhere else. In Estonia, the public debate on nuclear energy was actually initiated in 2019 by the establishment of Fermi Energia. And as a response to this public debate, Minister of Environment introduced a memorandum to the government on the possibilities for the introduction of nuclear energy in Estonia at the end of the year in 2019. And in this memorandum, we made a proposal to the government to establish a national nuclear energy working group to conduct a comprehensive feasibility study and analysis. Due to COVID crisis, the establishment was temporarily put on hold, but in April 2021, the working group was finally formed with a decree of the Ministry of Environment. So far, the working group meetings have been taken place 7 times, and the next meeting is actually scheduled for next week. All the materials and protocols of the meetings of the working group are publicly available on the webpage of the Ministry of Environment. So feel free to access them and review. And this also includes this survey that we took among members of the public on their support and potential problematic areas of nuclear energy. And the working group members are high-level representatives of almost all the ministries in Estonia and our current Radiation Safety Regulator Authority Environmental Board. And the working group is chaired by the Secretary General, Mr. Meelis Münt, from the Ministry of Environment. The reason why the Ministry of Environment is chairing the working group and not the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communications, who is responsible for energy matters, is the fact that the government saw that when Ministry of Environment is in charge, it might enjoy better public perception, because our main priority is to focus on the safety aspects of nuclear energy. And if this process is led by Ministry of Environment, then we can be sure that safety aspects and the environmental aspects of nuclear energy are not neglected. The government expects the working group to report back to them already by September this year in a form of interim report. And I want to stress that this interim report will not yet allow the government to adopt a decision in principle on nuclear energy. This will be only a mapping of our current situation and the development needs in different areas. The comprehensive report will be ready hopefully by the end of 2023. And before we present this report to the government, we have invited International Energy Agency to Estonia to conduct a nuclear energy infrastructure mission or evaluation mission called INIR. So the agency experts are going to review our report and see whether we have analyzed all those nuclear energy infrastructure issues thoroughly, so that we can make a knowledge-based decision on nuclear energy. On this slide, you can see the roadmap of the working schedule of our nuclear energy working group, and how the topics that the government mandated us to analyze have been allocated for the meetings. So last year we started with an overview of our energy needs and looked at the developments in our neighboring countries. Then we have analyzed the potentially suitable nuclear technologies for Estonia and made a preliminary selection that we would like to analyze further. Those are the SMRs that are potentially market ready by 2030. And we have analyzed waste management issues. And for the next week's meeting, we have scheduled a discussion on our competences, development needs, and legal framework matters. Here you can see those 19 nuclear infrastructure issues to be covered in our final report. Those are taken from the IAEA's milestones guidance document. So like Timo Tatar mentioned in his presentation, that we are very strictly following the agency's guidelines, and to make sure that we are not missing any of the important aspects. But in order to compose this comprehensive review, we will have to analyze very different aspects, starting from nuclear safety to the procurement and financing matters, and analyze nuclear security implications, emergency preparedness and response, and our electricity grid capabilities, etc. This is the reason why this procedure takes so long time. But as I mentioned, we want the government to make a knowledge-based decision. Here is an alternative timeline to the one that was presented by Mr. Liiva. The government's view is a bit more conservative. And if the government adopts a decision in principle on nuclear energy in the beginning of 2024, then, and it is followed then by the adoption of nuclear law and establishment of regulatory authority, and everything goes without major delays, then we see that our first nuclear power plant could start operating in the beginning of 2035. So this is our a bit more conservative view. But yes, all those processes, in theory, can be speeded up. If there is a will, there is a way. But this is our current estimation. Finally, I will briefly mention a few words about international cooperation. Our main cooperation partner is, of course, International Atomic Energy Agency, which is functioning under the auspices of United Nations. And then we are cooperating with the Finnish Radiation and Nuclear Safety Authority, STUK, with whom we have a very long-term and good cooperation practice. And STUK is providing peer review to our interim report and is functioning as a consultant in this process. We are cooperating with the United States, and they have included us into their SMRs competency development program called FIRST. And in this first program, we are cooperating also with the JICC, with whom who's providing us site characterization training course at the end of June, actually. Then we have had bilateral meetings with France, Germany, Canada, and UK, and also with Japan on potential cooperation. And like Meelis Münta mentioned in the morning, we are very glad that Estonia does not have to go through this process alone, and there is a huge interest and support from the international community to our working group. And the areas where we need the most support is, of course, competences, building of competences, drafting legislations, and developing this robust regulatory framework in order for us to be able to license those SMRs. Because although this nuclear power plant could be constructed and operated by private sector, the government still has to have a framework and legislation in place, and we're going to have to make quite heavy investments into development of this framework. And there we need also support from international communities to know what is the right way and what would be most feasible options for Estonia. So this concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much.